It's April 1865. The Civil War is finally over. America is exhausted, shattered, and uncertain. Entire cities lie in ruins. More than 600,000 soldiers are dead. Farms are burned, railroads twisted, and 4 million formerly enslaved people stand on the edge of freedom, waiting to see whether the promises of the war will finally be honored. Then, in a single night, everything changes. Abraham Lincoln is shot at Ford's Theater. The man who held the Union together through its darkest hour is gone. And suddenly, the future of the United States falls into the hands of a man almost no one truly trusted. His name was Andrew Johnson, a tailor from Tennessee, a man with no formal education, a man who owned slaves, a fierce racist, and within months his decisions would nearly tear the country apart all over again. If you want real American history, not the cleaned-up version, subscribe now, because this story explains why the wounds of the Civil War never truly healed. Andrew Johnson was born into crushing poverty in 1808. His father died when he was just 3 years old, leaving his mother to struggle as a washerwoman. Johnson never attended school. He learned to read and write only in his teens while apprenticed to a tailor. As a boy, he ran away from his apprenticeship, dodging bounty hunters before finally settling in Greenville, Tennessee. There, he married Eliza McCardle, a woman who educated him and helped shape his ambitions. Johnson clawed his way upward through sheer stubbornness. He built a business, bought land, and by the 1850s owned enslaved people himself. He saw slavery not as a moral evil, but as a natural order, even as he despised wealthy plantation elites. That contradiction would define his life. Politically, Johnson rose as a populist champion of poor white Southerners. He became mayor, then governor, then U.S. Senator. When Southern states began seceding in 1861, Johnson made a surprising choice. He stayed loyal to the Union. He called secession treason. He believed the Constitution was sacred, but only for white men. Lincoln recognized his loyalty and made him military governor of Tennessee, then vice president in 1864, to balance the ticket and appeal to Southern Unionists. It was a political calculation. No one expected Johnson to become president. History had other plans. When Johnson took office after Lincoln's assassination, the nation held its breath. Radical Republicans wanted justice, protection for freed slaves, and a reconstructed South built on equal citizenship. Moderates wanted stability. Johnson promised firmness, even threatening to hang Confederate leaders. But it was a lie, perhaps even to himself. Deep down, Johnson believed the Southern states had never legally left the Union and therefore required no punishment. What followed was presidential Reconstruction. And it was a disaster. Johnson issued mass pardons to former Confederates, restoring their land, wealth, and political rights. Former rebel generals and officials were elected back into power almost immediately. At the same time, Johnson offered freed black Americans nothing: no land, no vote, no protection. Southern legislatures rushed to pass black codes, laws that forced freed people into labor contracts, restricted movement, banned gun ownership, and denied basic legal rights. Slavery was gone in name only. Johnson defended it all under the banner of states' rights. Congress fought back. When lawmakers passed the Freedmen's Bureau Bill to provide food, education, and assistance to former slaves, Johnson vetoed it. When they passed the Civil Rights Act of 1866, guaranteeing citizenship and equal protection, Johnson vetoed that too, claiming it favored blacks over whites. Congress overrode both vetoes, a historic rebuke. Johnson responded with fury. He attacked Congress publicly, gave rambling speeches, compared himself to Jesus Christ, and accused lawmakers of treason. Violence spread across the South. Riots in Memphis and New Orleans killed dozens of black Americans. Johnson blamed the victims. The conflict escalated into a full constitutional crisis. Johnson opposed the 14th Amendment and urged Southern states to reject it. Republicans seized control of Reconstruction, placing the South under military rule and enforcing black voting rights. Johnson sabotaged enforcement whenever possible. He removed commanders who protected freedmen and replaced them with sympathetic officers. White supremacist terror groups flourished. The Ku Klux Klan rose in the shadows. Johnson denied their existence. The breaking point came in 1868. Congress passed the Tenure of Office Act to prevent Johnson from firing key officials without approval. Johnson defied it anyway, removing Secretary of War Edwin Stanton. The House impeached him within days. It was the first presidential impeachment in American history. The nation watched as the Senate trial unfolded. Conviction would remove Johnson from office by a single vote. At the last moment, 7 Republican senators broke ranks. Johnson survived, but barely. He limped through the rest of his presidency powerless and disgraced. Before leaving office, Johnson issued a final sweeping amnesty, pardoning all remaining Confederates, including Jefferson Davis. The damage was already done. Land promised to freed families was returned to former slave owners. Reconstruction collapsed. Jim Crow laws hardened. Segregation became law. A century of racial injustice followed. Andrew Johnson left office despised. Historians consistently rank him among the worst presidents in American history, not because he failed to act, but because he acted deliberately. Driven by racism, ego, and blind devotion to white supremacy, Johnson nearly destroyed what the Union Army had saved on the battlefield. The Civil War was won with blood. Andrew Johnson almost lost the peace. If this story changed how you see American history, subscribe now. Because the truth doesn't weaken a nation, it prepares it. What makes Andrew Johnson's presidency even more dangerous is how close America came to sliding backward into open rebellion. In 1867 and 1868, the South was a powder keg. Federal troops oversaw elections where black men voted for the first time in American history. Schools for freed children opened. Black legislators took seats in Southern governments. For a brief moment, the promise of Reconstruction felt real, and Andrew Johnson quietly worked to undermine every step of it. Behind the scenes, Johnson instructed military commanders to interfere as little as possible. When violence broke out, he refused to intervene. Night riders terrorized black families. Republican officials were beaten or killed. Ballot boxes disappeared. Johnson dismissed reports of terror as exaggerations. He believed that order meant white control, not justice. Every delay, every refusal to act, strengthened those who wanted to restore the old system. Johnson's racism was not hidden. In veto messages and private conversations, he warned that granting black Americans equality would Africanize the South. He argued that black citizens were incapable of self-government. These beliefs shaped policy. They shaped silence. They shaped suffering. While Congress fought to expand citizenship, Johnson fought to preserve hierarchy. Economically, the consequences were devastating. Freed families were promised land that never came. Confiscated plantations were returned to former slave owners. Sharecropping replaced slavery, trapping millions in cycles of debt and dependency. Without land, without capital, without protection, freedom became fragile. And Johnson knew it. He simply did not care. Even internationally, America looked unstable. European powers watched the impeachment crisis with disbelief. Newspapers mocked the United States as divided and directionless. Russia, sensing opportunity, sold Alaska partly to strengthen ties against Britain. America survived, but its moral authority was damaged. When Johnson finally left office in 1869, he did so without dignity. Ulysses S. Grant refused to ride with him to the inauguration. There was no farewell celebration, no national gratitude. Johnson returned to Tennessee angry, bitter, and convinced history would vindicate him. It never did. He spent his final years chasing political redemption. He attacked Reconstruction. He denounced Grant. He claimed Congress had betrayed the Constitution. In 1875, he achieved a strange footnote in history, becoming the only former president ever elected back to the U.S. Senate. 5 months later, he was dead from a stroke. Today, historians agree on one thing. Andrew Johnson did not inherit an impossible situation. He inherited an opportunity to reunite the nation with justice, to protect freedom with law, to turn victory into progress. And he chose the opposite path. The Civil War decided whether America would survive. Reconstruction decided what kind of country it would become. And Andrew Johnson nearly ensured that the answer would be inequality, resentment, and division. This is why his presidency matters, not as a relic of the past, but as a warning. Because nations do not collapse only through war. Sometimes they are undone by leaders who refuse to rise above their worst instincts. If you're still here, you understand something crucial. History is not distant, it is alive. And the consequences of Andrew Johnson's choices still echo through America today. Subscribe if you want more stories that reveal how close this country came to losing everything, not once, but many times.